Hello, trumpet players and musicians too in general, because this topic isn't just for trumpet players, it works for everybody. Today we're going to talk about deliberate versus mindless practice. There are a lot of articles out there, whether it's on the internet or YouTube or music journals, that talk about the dangers of mindless practice. And if you read these articles, they talk as if you are never supposed to practice mindlessly. And I disagree with that. I believe that mindless practice is actually the final objective. That's where we're trying to go. That's where all of the deliberate practice is supposed to be heading. Now, I'm one of those people that believes that you cannot get, okay, so like you don't get apples from an orange tree, right? You you are what you eat. That's another one of those sayings. And then, so for me, practice works the same way. It has the same relationship with your performance. You cannot have a performance that's not what the practice was. For example, sloppiness. If you're sloppy in your practice time, it's not possible to play without being sloppy in your performance. Let that sink in, right? I'm hoping you already know that. If you don't already know that, then that needs to be what you're focusing on right now. What you do when you're practicing cannot be differentiated from what you do when you're performing. And you know, a lot of people talk about trying harder in that context. Well, if you try hard, if you try harder in performance, you can do better than when you were practicing. It's not possible. It's not possible. You never play better. And in this case, we're talking about better, but that's not what I'm talking about. But in this case, you never play better in performance than you do at home practicing. All right? So, but in this video, we're not talking about better or worse. We're talking about the kind of practice time that you spend. But I just wanted to demonstrate that you cannot have something different in performance than what you have in your practice time. So let's set that aside now. I believe that, well, you know what? Instead of saying what I believe, let's talk about it this way. Which would you rather prefer? Which would you prefer? To go on stage and be 100% mindful and deliberate about every tiny aspect of your performance? Or, in contrast to that, would you rather go up there and be so well prepared that you almost don't have to consciously think about what you're doing? The composition almost just performs itself. I'm going to hope that you prefer the second one. If you don't prefer the second one, if you prefer to be a mastermind, someone that goes up there and your conscious thoughts are so brilliant that the people, the music just comes out wonderful, right? I don't have time to go into why that's not a good thing in this, except for just to say that your subconscious mind is far, far, far more powerful than your conscious mind will ever be. So, no, I don't think that first one, the deliberate performance, is the better of the two. I believe the mindless performance is the better performance in every aspect of what we do. Mindless performance is better. I've experienced mindless performances in my career. The first time was when I was in seventh or eighth grade. I had a solo. I remember standing up for the solo. I performed the solo, but I have no memory of that whatsoever. And even at the time, I had no memory of it. When I came to, when I woke up afterwards, I looked out into the audience. Everybody's standing up, clapping. The trumpet player to my right is patting me on the leg and saying, "That's all for you," he said. They're clapping for you. And I think he said that because I was still um, zoned out and I wasn't acknowledging the audience in any way. I think that's why he was saying that. But that was my first mindless performance. I've had many since. Probably the most significant mindless performance I've ever had was when I was performing in a jazz club. I was performing the giant steps, improvising over the changes for giant steps. Now, for that to make sense, you need to know the background. I believe that every musician has strengths and weaknesses, and we each have our own different strengths and weaknesses. And it's just as true for the jazz stuff as it is for everything else. So some people don't have as much difficulty playing giant steps as I had. All of my weaknesses as a jazz trumpet player and giant steps, they meshed. Everything that was hard for me as a player is right there in that tune. Okay? And so it took me, I worked on giant steps for 10 years. I worked on that tune for 10 years. I even ended up writing my own book. I'll link to it here. I even wrote my own book, right? That book wasn't to sell. I ended up selling it later. It's like one of our least selling books because it wasn't meant to be sold like that. I wrote that book so that it would help me learn how to play giant steps that in a way that was true to my personality, my musical personality. And it worked. 10 years later, I'm at Houston's most prestigious jazz club, Cezanne. I'm playing, it's giant steps chord progressions, but an original tune that I wrote. And I'm playing, and I'm looking at my fingers saying, wow, look at that. My conscious mind was not playing the trumpet. My subconscious mind was playing the trumpet. And that's what we mean by mindless, don't we? I think the ultimate goal of every musician should be mindless performance. So yeah, I was so mindless about playing giant steps by that time that I could look at what my fingers were doing, be astonished with that, and not think one bit about what notes I was playing or how fast it was going or anything mechanical like that. It was almost, I hate this term, but it was almost an out-of-body experience because my body was playing giant steps, improvising over giant steps. And that's the part that's astonishing, right? I'm improvising. We think when we're learning jazz that we need to be 100% engaged with our conscious mind to be able to improvise. I think it's actually the other way around. I think that's one of those myths. When you're improvising, there's no way for you to think of all that stuff. You can't think of all of that at the same time. It's not possible. There's so many things. It's enough to have to just play your horn. You want to add over the top of that improvisation over one of the hardest tunes that was ever written. Okay? Let me give you one more example. Oh, I had it in my head. Now I can't remember. Oh, sight reading. Did you know that sight reading could be 100% mindless? There's a gig that I used to play. The band doesn't work anymore. But basically, you sit down. It's a society band. You sit down and you turn the page and turn the page and turn the page. It's a sight reading gig. And there's no calling of tunes. You just start at the beginning and you end at the end. Start the first song, read it down, flip the page, read it down, flip the page, read it down. And I loved that gig because I reached that state of mindlessness by the fourth or fifth tune. And I could sight read and play everything correctly while looking out in the audience and stuff like that. Or thinking about what I was going to do when I get home. And you may think, well, that's a bad attitude. To me, I find that astonishing. That you could sight read a whole gig down and not actually consciously think about what you're doing. And I'm going to remind you one more time, our subconscious minds are far, far exponentially more powerful than our conscious mind will ever be. So, if we put those two things together, we started by saying that your practice is what your performance is. Your performance is what your practice is. And then we say that we prefer to be mindless in our performance. Then it makes sense that you have to achieve a level of mindlessness in your practice time in order to achieve that in your performance. Let that sink in. Because, yes, I understand that this is extremely controversial. Because the culture that we live in, the musician's culture, wants to sell that whole completely deliberate, 100% conscious style of practicing. And it's a lie. It's not accurate. You cannot have mindless performances with 100% conscious, mindful, deliberate practice time. It's not possible. You can't squeeze blood from a turnip. Okay? I don't know where I got that. Anyway, you see what I'm saying? In order to have mindless performance, I know I'm sounding, I just want this to sink in. In order to have mindless performance, you have to have mindless practice. Does that mean we should not be mindful when we practice? It comes down to, here's the answer, it comes down to what are you doing and when. There is a time when it is paramount to be completely mindful and deliberate when you practice. And that time is when you introduce new material, whether it's a new exercise, a new, I just said exercise. What am I thinking? Like etudes, new material, anything. Oh, I know what it was. A new technique, right? A new breathing technique or something like that. You have to be mindful of that. You have to be absolutely deliberate. Because what goes in your brain comes out of your brain the same way. So you have to be absolutely mindful when something new is learned. Mindful and deliberate. You know, when we talk about memory, there's three parts of memory. Okay? We have the input stage, we have the retention, and we have retrieval. We want to input the music into our brain with all of its details. Everything correct with all of its details. Because that's what we're going to remember. That's what's going to come out. That's that old computer saying, garbage in, garbage out. It's the same thing with our brains when we're learning music. Remember what we said earlier about being sloppy. If you're sloppy in your practice time, that's what's going into your brain. That's what's getting stored. Then later, what comes out is sloppiness, right? That's a no-brainer. So yes, when you learn new material, whether it be, so I'm going to recap on that, new exercises, new techniques, and new literature. We want that to be of the utmost quality when it goes in. We want it to be perfect. And you're not going to know that it's perfect unless you have your conscious mind engaged. Let that sink in. You cannot guarantee that what's getting put into your memory is perfect unless you have complete, deliberate, mindful practice going on. So yes, there is a time for deliberate, mindful practice. So all of those articles that you read, they are all completely right, but only in that regard. Where they're wrong is where they make the mistake of saying that it needs to be like that all the time. And I've seen stuff like this in our academia, the academic world of music. There are things that are true, for example, for beginners, that are not true for experts. But what we teach in academia is for the beginners. Stuff like, for example, for the brass players, that everything has to be open, 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 open. That's just not true. That's true if you're a beginner. And you can't play those notes where it has to be more closed. So yes, there's a lot of stuff that academia gets wrong. And so in the same regard, when it comes to mindful practice as opposed to mindless practice, the beginners need to be almost always, from the time they start playing to the time they stop playing, completely focused, mindful, and deliberate about what they're doing. Because all of it is new to them at that point. Every single bit of it is new. But that doesn't mean that what's true for them is true for everybody else. As you develop and you start putting more and more stuff into your subconscious mind, you have to begin practicing in a way that doesn't require your conscious mind to be involved. All right? So yes, there is a time when you have to be deliberate, but we're striving to be mindless when we perform. We are striving to play that composition that you have to perform in public so mindlessly that you can do, and this is something I've done before, that's why I'm using it as an example. You could do simple math in your head while you're playing the composition. This is something I've done before. Put the math problem in front of you, play the composition, and solve that math problem in your head. I don't do that anymore, but it was a fun experiment to do in the 90s. That's something I did in the 90s. The whole point of that was to really stress the mindlessness of practicing. So let me recap what I'm saying here, because I'm not saying that mindful practice is bad. It's absolutely necessary. And you know what? I think this is one of those issues where people over-exaggerate. They get too binary on it. There's a time to be mindful, and there's a time to be mindless. The ultimate goal of everything that we do on the trumpet, on your instrument, is to eventually become completely mindless. I read uh it was a autobiography of the bass player. I can't remember Charles Mingus. I think Charles Mingus. And he's in the book, he's talking about conversations that he and the other guys are having while they're on stage. That's mindless performance. You can't do that. You can't you can't be mindlessly performing if you haven't done that before. Now, it's quite possible that those guys that did that, it was just from the experience they had. I'm not saying that they practiced mindlessly. That would be a lie if I said that. But I think that story demonstrates exactly the power of mindless practicing. So when you as a teacher, if you're a teacher, when you're telling the students how important it is to be mindful when you practice, I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'm saying it's incomplete, and you might want to also tell them that the reason why tell them why you have to be mindful so that the information goes in correctly. But then you might want to say that eventually you won't have to be as mindful anymore. That the music will just come out right. All right? And if you're not a teacher, if you're a student or just a student of the trumpet or a student of your instrument, you don't have a teacher. Um, Consider this because I've heard over the years, and this is why I had to form this opinion. Over the years, I have heard so many students beat themselves up about not being able to concentrate all the way through a scale. They're striving to think about every single note as they play. And halfway through, they pull a blank, right? And they think this is wrong. And I'm thinking, congratulations, you're there. This is the final objective. This is where you're trying to go. I've been practicing the same scale exercises since the same exact scale exercises. The only thing I've changed is how high or how low they go. I've been doing those same scale exercises and a lot of other stuff too, but I'm using the scales as an example. I call them the tonalization studies. I've been doing them since I invented them in the mid-'80s. I do them every day that I practice, at least 20 of them. And it's amazing because, you would think, okay, well, Mr. Lewis, why don't you do other exercises instead? Well, there's benefits to doing those exercises. But I've been doing them so long now, I don't have to think about them. A lot of times I'll read the newspaper while I'm doing my skills. And I know that sounds like sacrilege to a lot of you. It's you think that I know what you're thinking is that I'm going to be playing sloppy or something like that, or I might be even playing wrong notes and not even know it. But here's the thing. I can be reading an article while I'm doing my scales. If a mistake happens, my conscious mind is alerted. And I go back and fix it. That's only true for the scales, but I'm not going to get into all of that. I don't believe in always going back and fixing everything. That's one of those other things that people would find controversial about what I teach. But with the scales, I'll go back. When I say scales, they're not traditional band scales. I have a whole set of a series of scale patterns that I go through that go up to your full range and then down and through all these different variations. You can learn more about that. I'll put a link right here because I just did a video about that, the tonalization studies. But yes, I've been doing those same exercises for all this time, and I'm not done with them yet. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. I'm not done with those exercises. I want it to go deeper and deeper and deeper into my subconscious so that when I'm improvising, when I'm sight reading, I don't think it's a coincidence, by the way, that when I'm sight reading, I can reach that stage of my mind, zoning out and playing 100% subconsciously. I don't think there's a coincidence between that and being completely mindless in my scales. Those two things are related because I don't have to think about the notes. I see the key signature, I hear the key, and so all of that's happening on a subconscious level. And I really believe that the real big reason why that works that way for me is because my scales are 100% mindless. And it's just not just the major scales at that. Anyway, so this did go a little longer than I expected, but I really wanted to make my point. It's very important to be mindful and deliberate. But the ultimate objective should be, for everybody, should be mindless practice. Because that's where your best musicianship is going to be found. Not in your mastermind ability to consciously control every aspect of your musicianship. No. Your subconscious mind is exponentially more powerful than your conscious mind. And we should be striving to do more of what we do from that part of our mind instead of the conscious part of our mind.